Welcome back to my inbox. So I took a look at your stuff a little while ago. It was a reel full of lots of animation, and you've resubmitted so that I can see the second half because I didn't have enough time in the review to review the whole thing. Demo reels are typically difficult to review because there's a lot of information to unpack, and someone like myself doesn't want to just do a really high level lofty thing. They want to kind of dig in and try to give you some useful feedback. So thanks for sending it back, and I took another look. So let's take a look at the second half of the reel here. Actually, hold on a second. Let me just switch it over to so you can see what I'm seeing. Oh, hold on a second. Let me fix this up a little bit. I'm not using the whole. Let me just do this. There we go. Let's use the whole screen, shall we? I will close this so we get a little bit more screen space. All right, good. So let's take a look here. It was from around the samurai onward, so we'll take a look at it a couple times. Some first-person shooter stuff and some really quick sort of third-person stuff with the samurai. Lots of stuff to talk about here. That is for sure. Let me move my, hold on a second. Let me move my little head thing here. Oops. I'll move this maybe like right here. Hopefully that's a good spot. I'll have to keep an eyeball on that. Okay, so let's take a look at the samurai stuff first. It's pretty good. I think it works. It's nice and fast. I like how the action is pretty fast, and then there's a big emphasis on the hold. Usually that's how video game animations work. More of an emphasis on the before and the after, and the action itself has got to be quite quick. And a lot of that has to do with the desire for the actions to take place quickly. Otherwise, it'll feel too sluggish for the player. He's a big, heavy character, though, so I think I would have expected a little bit more work on sort of overlapping action and settles, nice, complicated sort of settles because of all that weight. He moves around, and then he just sort of the whole body just sort of settles in like a sort of a singular action, as opposed to having sort of conflicting masses that are moving in different directions that he's trying to stabilize after moving really quickly like that. Especially for the ending here, because this movement right here, you'll see that the whole body just feels like it kind of does an overshoot and a settle. What you should try to do is make sure that you're getting good overlap on those big body parts. Those big, huge arms are going to overlap the body, and you're going to get this sort of jiggle like stuff happening, and that's where things start to feel really nice and heavy and interesting to look at. The main thing I think, the first thing I said here though, is that you could really use, assuming this is like an enemy character. I don't know if it's supposed to be an enemy character or a player character, but let's just pretend it's an enemy character. You want to make sure that this motion right here is properly telegraphed. The player should always get a feeling for what's going to happen based on the anticipation, so they can read it and react, as opposed to it being a complete utter surprise. And the fact that he kind of anticipates kind of like this. It doesn't really feel like an anticipation at all. It feels kind of like it just feels like a kind of a breakdown. And it looks like he's gonna attack maybe this way, but instead he kind of turns and attacks kind of in the direction he was facing a little while ago. So I just feel like that's very confusing to the player. And that's the same is true for player characters, really, is the feedback needs to give a sense of vector. It needs to give a sense of movement and direction, so that it can be anticipated what's about to happen, and because things happen pretty quickly, so we want to try to keep things kind of consistent and telegraphed, like I said. So yeah, I just feel like there's some interesting actions here, but they don't lead us properly. I feel kind of surprised by it. And then the last note I had here was just consider adding mocked up speed lines for really quick movements like this. Can you see how quick he's slashing the sword? It kind of just starts to flash. And it flashes so much that like it's just difficult to read. So you might want to, it's going to make your stuff look way better with quick little action lines. This can be done. You'll find tutorials online for sure on this, but you can just use even geometry, you could just have like pieces of geometry that are that are modeled. Sometimes people will make it with like cylinders or rings that are flattened, and then they just play with the sweep angle. There's lots of ways of doing it. You can also you could put it in like After Effects and do some sort of stuff in 2D afterwards if you want. There's a million ways of doing it, but anyways, food for thought. I think these kind of actions, especially for sword swipes, are always going to read better and feel better if you can mock it up a little bit on the demo reel. Otherwise it just feels too fast, and it will work fine in a game because typically the game is going to have motion trails on these weapons, and so it'll look really great there. But you kind of, you don't have the advantage of that unless you put it in the game engine. So you're gonna have to mock something up basically to try to make it feel right. Okay, so I think I had another note here. Moving the foot with the most weight on it here. So you'll notice that all this weight is down here. I was going backwards. Now I'm kind of moving. I'm scrubbing forward here. And the weight kind of like, it's hard to, you can't really even see it from this angle here. But if you look from this angle, you'll see the weight is all on it, and then he's already moving that foot like this way, which is no good. You can't move a foot with that much weight on it. You're gonna have to have the weight kind of come up first, and then the foot can reposition. You got to get the weight off of the foot before you're able to move it. Feels like oh wait, there was another thing here. What else I said? Consider having, also, try to break the return to idle movement down a bit more. Consider having a breakdown that has the weight come up that will allow the foot you want to move to do so. So like I said, you got to get the weight off. Throwing the weight upwards will allow that, but it's also going to create a nice moment of like a nice arc and a nice moment for the weight to come back down and settle. You can see that this is very kind of linear motion. There's no verticality to it. It sort of just feels like it's moving this way. And so there's never a moment where and look at what the hips are doing. The hips are kind of moving up a little bit, but not with enough force to kind of throw the weight up. It kind of goes upwards, and then suddenly it goes sort of straight downwards and then backwards. Oops. And then backwards like this. So it's kind of doing this weird path. So it's missing an arc. And I think the arc of that motion will feel a lot more natural and a lot more pleasing to the eye. Okay, next stuff is all this FPS stuff. So FPS stuff is tricky to show because it lacks context. Often I find it difficult to really showcase on a demo reel. Some things to keep in mind, some ground rules. I think it comes up a little bit later, but one thing I would say for sure is high level. I would highly encourage you to maybe have like a very simple mock environment. And the reason why I would do that is especially because you've animated the camera, it's very difficult to understand the animation when the camera's moving, and but you can't tell what the camera, it's hard to differentiate what's camera movement, what's actual animation on the body, because without that frame of reference, you don't know how the camera's moving. Now you have this sort of target like grid in front, but it's also kind of moving with the head. So it's just distracting. It's very difficult to understand. Have something grounded that doesn't move. And like a ground plane, and have maybe a couple of simple objects in front, so we can really get an understanding of perspective and parallax when the camera's moving. Otherwise, it really feels very difficult to look at and understand what's actually happening. Feels like the camera shake is coming a bit too soon here on this first action. It's right here. So you can see he's swinging, and I guess you're because you're thinking he's swinging through, so the head is going to move. I think in general, head movements are tricky because, you have shakes in here. You also have some head movements, and it really depends on the project. But I know that most games I worked on that are first person, it's very, 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 very much desired that all that stuff on the head is done in a procedural way rather than an animation way. It's not always like this. I feel like, takedowns where it's like a full sequence that something's happening, that makes sense that the head's animated and the camera's animated. But things that are quick and more kind of systemic, in the game. It's just because it's hard to tweak the camera animations when they're on the animation. It's much easier if they're kind of decoupled and they exist somewhere else, and it's very tunable for like designers. It's very annoying for designers to have to ask animators to go change the camera. It's not great, and it's annoying for animators as well. Trust me, you got other stuff to worry about. You don't have to go and like basically just because you have a designer that's really trying to tweak the hell out of the camera that you have to go back and constantly tweak the animation and re-export. It's not worth your time. Now, that being said, I totally understand your desire to put it in here because it kind of showcases the FPS stuff a little bit better. Things would maybe feel a little bit static. So, I mean, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying at the very least, like I said, try to help us understand it better by making sure that you have some sort of environment, and that's going to help us kind of ground us a little bit and better interpret what's actually happening in front of the camera. Now, and what's happening to the camera specifically. But yeah, so I just feel like it's hard to understand what's really happening here because you have this sort of, the hand leaves the screen left, right here, and then it sort of swings through, and then there's just, it just feels, I don't know. I feel like it might have been better if it came in and maybe the camera then kind of came afterwards. Again, it's really hard for me to really get a feel for it without seeing the ground plane. So I don't know if that really feels right or not. I think once you put the ground plane in, maybe that you'll see for yourself whether that works well or not. Let's see. It might be a good idea to have a very simple yeah, I already said this. So try to avoid silhouettes of both arms falling on top of one another. So there's a lot of stuff happening here. It's also hard to understand this little hit pause that's happening because of all the movement that's on the camera. But I think it works generally speaking. But like it just feels like a lot of noise in front of the camera. Like it just feels like everything is just all over the place, and that's a lot of that has to do with maybe you're animating the camera too much because it just feels like it's hard. And again, this might feel better once we have a ground plane. It just feels like there's a bunch of movement happening in front of the camera, and I don't understand where it's coming from. That ground plane is going to do wonders for making this feel a lot more stabilized and much more easy to interpret. One thing for sure, though, is try to avoid this kind of stuff, because when you have all this kind of quick action, when you have this other hand that kind of sort of starts to merge with the silhouette of the other arm, when there's so much movement happening, you can kind of get lost, and it makes it more difficult to follow and understand the action that's actually happening. So just be careful with those little moments. I would have maybe had that arm come through, but then drop the other hand so it doesn't have to compete screen space wise. You also always want to try to make sure that you don't cluttering the screen with a whole pile of unnecessary stuff in front of the camera, because naturally the player requires that space to see targets and to see danger before they get killed, basically. So players get very frustrated when there's too much stuff in front of the camera. Strange moment here with the static. I just caught this when I was stepping through, but like you have this one moment where this arm just stops for some reason, like for 2 frames, and then the only thing it changes is there's the it seems like the wrist rotates randomly and the fingers move. So just make sure you maybe clean that up a little bit. Simplify the motion on the knife animation. So when I look at this knife animation, it just feels like a lot of movement, and there's not a lot of time to do it. It just feels like there's a lot of stuff. It feels kind of like this. And if we step through it, we'll see. So it's kind of coming across over here, then it's going up, and then it's going over. It doesn't even feel like a stab. It just kind of like, it doesn't feel like a stab. It just feels like it kind of goes up and then kind of just then moves over like this. So it's not reading, I think, as well as it could. Let's take a quick look. I did a quick check on like one of my favorite first-person shooters, Valorant, and I just wanted to see what their knife kills look like. And there's a really great one here. It depends what kind of knife you have on your character. But I want you to notice really quickly how simple this is. There's kind of a deploy, and that don't get that confused with the actual attack. That's just because he's pulling out the knife. And then watch the attack. It's like really quickly up into a pose. It gets held for a number of frames. I should have actually, downloaded this so I could have stepped through this.
We're not going to execute until like 30 seconds.
Oh no, I miss it.
Oh, I should have gotten that, but I didn't expect them to
pick.
peek like that. He's running around. He's rotating.
Oh, I thought it was right there. Oh, man, I lost it.
Wait, I'm smoking screen.
Ah.
Yeah, go.
Okay, here it is.
I'm 1 HP. I'm gonna put it down.
I can heal.
It's 2 beats. It's this and then this, and they read really well. It feels like a stab, and there's an emphasis on the anticipation and on the consequence. And then there's even actually a final beat where it feels like it's being pulled out. Now, that pull out doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's no longer it's not embedded in anybody. But I still think it looks nice. And it may look awesome sometimes if you're literally right behind somebody, you do that. It might feel like you've stabbed somebody and you're pulling the blade out. My point here I'm trying to make is the action is, oh God, I keep thinking I'm scrubbing my animation in a video player here.
I'm 1 HP. I'm gonna put it down.
I can heal.
Look how long, like,
I'm 1 HP. I'm gonna put it down.
I can heal.
you know, it's like, bah. It feels like most of what I'm seeing here are held poses and very, very quick actions.
HP. I'm gonna put it down.
I can heal.
Simple and effective.
You got it.
You knifed it.
Anyways, I just thought it would be worth showing because I think that its simplicity is really, really key in a situation like this. One other thing I want to take a look at is the camera.
I can heal.
Notice how the camera is even affected at all. This is very common. Most game FPS, especially very competitive ones, won't allow the animators to touch the camera at all because it's like it's disorienting. And so because this is very systemic and it's not an actual kind of takedown, it's very rare to have anything in there. There may be a little bit of a camera shake that might be there, but that's about it. You won't see all kinds of movement like this because it's disorienting and it's a competitive shooter, and that's definitely not what players would like. They would complain about this, and it would be quickly removed from the game, trust me. So anyways, I just think it's always important to go and take a look at references. I feel like you have been doing some good homework here, as we'll talk about it in a little bit, but I feel like, in this particular case, I feel like you need to be careful with what you're suggesting with this knife action. Okay, so what else we got here? I got a comment about bonus points for rigging and using this lever on the mag release right here. So it's very important to do your homework when it comes to shooters because people who play shooters typically they've played a lot of them, and some of them actually enjoy the use of actual guns. Some of them are ex-military. The point is your fans are going to kind of a knowledge base here, and there's going to be an expectation for accuracy in some cases, depending on the game. And I want to show you like. This guy, it was really quick to find how to reload an AK, and you got it pretty much right. The exception being, of course, you have a magazine that's taped to another magazine, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most part, it works. But he talks about in this video about how, if you watch the action, see if I can find this. He does this really fast here. See, so what's actually happening is he to do a quick reload, he pulls up and you don't need to do this because he's got the already a magazine. He just wants to swap it around, but there is an action where that back tab is being hit and hit forward, so he can just knock the magazine right out of its seat. And I just feel like, I don't know. It just feels like that's just sitting there and kind of being ignored when it would be nice if the thumb was sort of knocking it a little bit as that force was being applied. I'm just being a nerd. I like the idea of reloading coming from the tape second magazine, but we lose that detail because the hand comes out of the shot. So you see here, we remove the magazine like this, pop it up, right? And again, that's why it would have been nice if this lever was being used here, because that lever is actually hooking into this little tab here. Pulls the magazine down and out of the shot, and then it comes back in, and you can see that his hand is inverted. But I would rather keep that down low in the shot, so don't cover too much of the screen, but try to keep it in the shot so we can at least appreciate what's going on here. I think the first time I looked at it, I was like, oh, why aren't we doing this? And then I realized that you were. But yeah, so it's always nice to make sure that these kind of details are going to be recognized and seen. Okay, no transfer of weight here. I want you to notice there's a bunch of force being applied to the magazine as it's being kind of pushed into the gun, but then there's like not really any, I don't feel like any pushback on the gun itself. Like I feel like if I'm slapping something into the gun, I feel like I'm going to feel like there's going to be some movement on the gun. I see a movement, but if you just watch the gun. See? It's moving this way and then it just sort of stops. It like hits a wall. If anything, I feel like it should have had like at least a little bit of a push up. Being picky, I think that these animations are actually pretty good. What's the next on the list here? Trying to pack too much movement into a short space. So let's just watch this. So it's a grenade throw, but there's a lot of stuff happening. In my opinion, I would drop this pre-anticipation. It's shooting forward. There's not really any need. You have it, it's down here and it's taking up all the space here. You could just have it kind of coming up out of the shot and then kind of back in, throwing it like this. It's unnecessary number of frames being used here. Not to mention that's gonna be frustrating to the player because it means that these extra frames of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like, well, I guess not 5, 6, maybe like 3 or 4 frames maybe it took to get from 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 or 4 frames max. They are being added to this action that don't need to be there. You could have just had it kind of come right from here out like this and then back in. That's my humble opinion. And the reason why I'm saying all this, just for the record, I'm not just, you may have noticed that I'm not just talking about the animation. I'm kind of weighing it against how it impacts the game and the player. This is super important for game animators to always be considering these things, and for FPS is even more so because FPSs are traditionally very competitive and people really don't want the animation screwing with their ability to control the game. This is a really quick way to get into like super hot water with your players. And so when you're going to put something on your demo reel, it's nice to communicate that you understand these concepts, that you understand the role the animator plays and how sensitive it is, especially with the FPS stuff, especially because I would never imagine hiring an animator on my FPS team that I didn't actually kind of first validate with my designers, because they're going to be working directly with the designers. And I want the designers to feel confident looking at their animation reel that like, oh yeah, this person gets it. I can see just by looking at it, there's a sensitivity to the gameplay. It's not just a bunch of, animation for animation's sake. It's like they're clearly communicating to me through the demo reel that they get it. They understand their role. They understand that they're there to make things look good, but to also absolutely do no harm to the gameplay. So, and this seems obvious, but it is worth its weight in gold. Trust me. It is absolutely critical, and you're going to get people are going to recognize this right away, and you're going to suddenly see that people are much more interested in your demo reel because of this. Your animation needs to be good. Don't get me wrong, but this added layer and dimension to the reel by having just little nods to the game designers that like, don't worry, I'm not a threat. I'm not going to come in and try to break your game. I get it, is going to be huge. And it's also going to be easier for you to make really great relationships, productive relationships. Wow. It's going to be much easier to make, to create good productive relationships on the production floor with the designers, because they're going to see you right away as an ally, as opposed to someone they're going to have to try to like deal with all the time. Okay, so next one, maybe put some titles up. So yeah, maybe some titles for like what's actually happening. I mean, maybe you don't need them. It's just that this one came out of nowhere and it kind of felt out of place. I didn't really understand what was happening right away. And I'm like, oh, that's a run. Again, it would maybe a mock environment would be helpful. Then you could actually have the character kind of floating forward and we can sort of see that there's a displacement. That could maybe be helpful. So maybe you don't need, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a big baby. Maybe again, the environment would really make me understand that moment, and I wouldn't have to do a double take. But I did do a double take the first time I saw that. Would have loved to have seen a transition to stop and idle as well. Yeah. So at the end of this run, because you do a transition into the run. But then we cut it short. I don't get to see like a stop and then kind of bringing it back down. I like having loops. I like to sort of see that like the bookends of things whenever possible. This is super subjective feedback, but I think it's nice and tidy when you don't cut around things and you try to complete the picture a little bit. There's a cool little moment here where he's like pulling the slide back and you can see a little happy face on the casing of the bullet. I feel like it happens a bit fast personally. I think you could probably use to shave off some of the frames that you use to like bring the gun up. Maybe it's a little faster. So he's, again, prioritizing what's important and deprioritizing things that are not, like just slow moving transitions. It's not bad. I'm being picky. Another movement where too much detail is trying to be added into a small place. This is made worse by a constant moving camera. So let's just kind of play this. So what's happening here is a gun jam. And I like this because you did your homework. I went and did a little homework myself. Took a look at like how to jam clearing drills for an automatic pistol. And it's cool because right in that video, he teaches the first thing you do is you want to smack the bottom of the magazine. And the reason you do this is because 9 times out of 10, that's the problem, because the magazine's not seated properly and it's jamming up the gun. But this is an actual breach, I think. I can't remember what they call it, a breach, I think. Basically what's happened is a casing didn't make it all the way out of the I can always forget the name of the port where the casings are spit out. Didn't make it all the way out, and then a bullet came up into the chamber, and then the slide gets locked and kind of gets pinched. This casing gets pinched, which is effing everything up. Now, of course, hitting the magazine's not going to fix that, which is cool. I like the idea because it's like struggling, and it makes sense that, the reflex would be do this first. And then the second thing you would do is rack the slide a couple times, which should clear anything that might be caught up inside the barrel. So you're doing everything right. You did your homework. I'm super impressed. I just feel like when you take a look, just watch the gun, just watch the trajectory of the gun. It's kind of doing a lot of this the entire time. You got to stabilize that. You got to stabilize it. Otherwise, it's just difficult to read any of the things that are going on here. I think that's just a general rule. So that's pretty much wraps it up. Hopefully I've given you a lot of stuff to think about here on the second half of this demo reel. Thanks again for sending it in. I hope to hear back from you as to whether it was helpful or not. And I'm doing another one of your reviews right now. So I guess I'll see you over there. Cheers.